So Joanne, hi. I'm happy
Hi,
to
Anna.
finally talk to you in person. And we've been chatting a lot through email about your project, L'Italianità. And I was happy to read yesterday a great little article that was written in La Voce di New York. Um, and so I just wanted to take some time today to get to know you a little bit better and hear
Yes,
about the motivation behind your project and your goals around it. And just to get to know you better, because I think it's a wonderful project, and I'm happy to
thank you.
talk
Thank
to
you.
you. And we have this, we'll have this conversation as a way for you to spread the word. Um, so tell me about yourself a little bit more and the inspiration for the project and your vision around it.
Boy, big topic. Let's see if I can condense it. First of all, thanks to the pandemic in a perverse way for giving me the time to undertake this project, because in normal life, there would be no staying at home as I had for a year to do. 2 summers ago, when he who shall remain unnamed was still in office and spouting his horrible comments about immigrants, I found myself increasingly angry because I am the granddaughter of immigrants. I come from an immigrant family. So I wrote about my mother's side of the family, the Mischis of Carlton Street and Ortona in Italy. And then, in the interest of equal time, and because there was also an interesting story, I wrote about my father's side of the family, the Matteras of Cummings Avenue and Ischia. I wasn't sure what I had to write about, because it was a long time ago. But I started to write, and as I wrote, the memories, I was able to kind of immerse myself in that time, growing up in the 50s, coming of age in the 60s, going off to art school in the 70s, and so forth. And there was a lot to write about, specifically with regard to my immigrant experience. And then when those 2 articles were finished and I posted them on my blog, I was still immersed in that time and in the memories of growing up. So I wrote a memoir. Hadn't really intended to. I thought, well, I'm just going to keep writing. I'll see where it goes. I just happen to have a copy here. And then I wrote this memoir,
Yes.
Vita, growing up Italian, coming out and making a life in art, with this lovely picture of me that's
I love that picture.
20 plus years old, right?
I love it. I love it.
And it was like the floodgates opened, and I think this happens, you think there's not all that much to write about, and then you immerse yourself in that time, and all the details, the smells, the sounds, the thoughts from that time all come back. So I wrote that. That was 2019 that I wrote it, published it just as the pandemic was starting. And as I'm writing it, I'm wondering, what was it like for other artists who are Italian American growing up around that time? Certainly for women growing up in the 50s and 60s, there was a real gender oppression. It's a little bit less now, but I know a little bit, a few stories of that artists have told. Probably 20 years ago, I did a project with Nancy Azzara, the sculptor, and Flavia Rondo, the art historian and writer. And we talked a little bit about what it was like growing up. They're a bit older than I am. And, it was horrifying and horrible for women. So I was curious to know what other women's stories were. And also I was curious to know what the men's stories were. I mean, they had to do things like face the draft. They had expectations placed on them. as my brothers did, you're going to grow up, you're going to have a family, you have to support a family, that kind of thing. And so I was just curious to know what it was like for other artists. And then the pandemic, the book was done, and then the pandemic happened, and I found myself still awash in all of these memories and all of this Italian American immigrant culture. So I sent an email to 40 something artists I knew, some of whom I knew personally, some of whom I'd shown with, and others whose work I knew, even though I didn't know them. And I asked them if they would like to be part of a project that I was beginning, and I described it. And almost all of them agreed and started sending in I asked them for images of their work, relatively recent images, and a narrative in which they talk about how the Italian American informed them personally, and by extension, informed their art. And it turned out that the stories are the heart and soul of this project. Mm-hmm. And so that's how this started, and it's been continued since then.
So how do you find the common threads amongst the stories in terms of the development of the individual artists and vis-a-vis their own artistic identities and how they assimilate that to their upbringing and the way that they were raised and so forth? Did you see like sort of a common thread amongst all the artists, male or female?
Many, many, many common threads. Some were amusing, some were kind of sad. There was, of course, the gender issue, which most women had experienced in some form or another. Patty Russati, for instance, who's up in Rochester, talked about why were the women always in the other room, when conversation took place. And Paula Rowland from who's now in Santa Fe, but who grew up as an Italian American in Biloxi, Mississippi, of all places.
Wow.
Her parents ran a motel.
Wow.
She felt that she was growing up in the 12th century in terms of the expectations that were put upon her to not do this, not do that. Girls had to grow up in a certain way. They had to aspire to certain things to live their life in a certain way. So there was that. But there were also these incredible stories, of the making. Every artist, almost every artist, grew up with a memory of making something themselves, something that they'd learned to do from a grandparent. For the girls, usually it was stuff like needlework, sewing, embroidery, knitting, crochet, lace making. And for the boys, it was all often stuff like gardening or carpentry. But there was crossover. Mm-hmm. David Ambrose, for instance, is the grandchild of tailors, and he now makes work in which he pierces paper with a needle.
Oh.
But instead of sewing and making embroideries, he is embellishing that perforated surface with dabs and dots of gouache and water media. So what you get is a surface that suggests an embroidered fabric, or perhaps even a stained glass window, but is in fact contemporary art. Let's see, who else? Jennifer Ciceri it grew up learning all the handcrafts from her grandmother, and she now makes large public sculptures that look like lace, but I mean large, really large, but they are made of laser cut ripstop nylon or metal. which then get installed in public spaces. So there's a lot of that kind of making. Lisa Zukowski talks about doing a crossover. She did building projects with her father and brothers, and she did handwork projects with her mother and aunts. So, you know, as a generation, although there was the sexism that we experienced, there was also, as we grew into the 60s, a lot more freedoms for us, certainly than our parents had. They were mired not only in generational ideas of gender, but also they had one foot in the old country and one foot here. And so they had to answer to their parents, to their parish, to, you know, all the sources that we really don't have to do anymore. And there was a lot of that. Many of us were crankers of the pasta machine, which I find hilarious. You know, what are you going to do as a kid? They tell you,
right.
Okay, just crank slowly and steadily. And, you know, so that's what we did as they made pasta. So there were, as the stories came in, there were just a lot of commonalities that were for me very heartwarming and uplifting. Lloyd Martin talks about growing up in a section of Providence called Federal Hill that had Italian and Irish immigrants. And he said, you always knew who the Italian immigrant families were because they always had tomatoes growing in the backyard. You know, so there are these stories that are familiar.
And so in having the artists tell their stories and sort of assembled in the project, do you think that it helped the artists sort of reclaim, in a way, that sort of melding of their cultural identities, you know, the crossing over of the Italian upbringing and then living in an American society? Because I find that expressing that, you know, expressing the story and then coupling it with the work, with the artwork, of the artist, that there is a kind of a reclaiming of that identity, which maybe we didn't really think about that much in those terms. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, especially because you and I are from a generation in which I don't know what your experience was, but mine was, don't talk with your hands. You don't need to learn Italian. You're American. We're naming you Joanne and not Giovanna because, you know, you're American, you're not Italian. We don't want you to be considered a guinea, a dago, or a wop the way we were. And so, you know, so that was the upbringing that I experienced. I was very fortunate to have an aunt, Antonina Misci, who for the first 23 years of her life grew up in Italy because she was not well the day the boat left for America with her mother on it. So she was left in the care of her mother's sister, and she grew up essentially the cosseted only child of her aunt and uncle. So when she came here, she was Italian. And she spoke dialect, but she also, the Ortonese dialect, but she had also had enough education because her aunt and uncle must have been sufficiently able to send her to school. And so she learned classic Italian, il vero italiano, and which she taught to me, as well as, you know, handwork, and she'd teach me Italian as we were doing projects together. So why am I telling you this? Oh, so that was my personal connection. And I've always seen not always, but by the time I got to art school, I initially denied and then embraced the textile connection. But I always felt Italian. Talking with some of the other artists or learning their stories, for some of them, it's not so much the art per se, but it's the culture. Like Paul Corio, for instance, talks about growing up as a Catholic boy. Now, he's long ago left the church, but his love of the art in those churches has not diminished. And so he talks about it as being a member of a club, you know, the club that grew up with the art in church. So our culture can express itself in different ways, if not necessarily through the art, through how we have been informed as artists.
That's really, it's very interesting, and to one of the points that you made in the article that came out recently in La Voce de New York, the complexity within that sort of crossing over of cultures. I know that for myself, and to this day, you know, there's still a lot of tension and having to negotiate the differences between being brought up one way and then being raised in a society that was very, very different from the way I was raised. I was, you know, we spoke Italian in the house, and it was not emphasized that I should be American. In fact, I was discouraged to not assimilate within the American culture. So it was a real struggle to play both sides of the fence, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's the difference between you are the child of immigrants and I'm the grandchild of immigrants. And so there's a difference.
Yes, absolutely.
It was a lot harder for you.
Yeah, it was very challenging, you know, very, very challenging. But, you know, what's interesting about the complexity of like within one's consciousness of whether you're conscious of it or not. And I wasn't conscious of it for a long time, but things that I did sort of show, you know, kind of exhibited the conflict, you know, or trying to balance the different tendencies and the different kinds of thinking that what comes out of that. And I think that having read many of the stories from the other artists, that having to sort of as a result that the artistic expression is almost necessary, you know, that an art comes out of that expression of how do you reconcile, you know, how do you see the world now, how do you reconcile those differences between how you were raised and how you've assimilated into American society. And I think that that's a challenge for all immigrants, all people who come to this country.
Yeah. And well, and when you think about it, I mean, we are for the most part all immigrants or children or grandchildren of immigrants. And so we are all bringing our ethnicity to ourselves, to our lives, and to our work. And for artists who, you know, we operate in a place that is both logical and emotional. I mean, that's where the art comes from. We can think about it, but it's coming from somewhere here. And so we are, you know, we are the combination or of expression comes, let me say it this way, our expression comes from who we are and all of that stuff, the immigrant stories, the immigrant experiences, the American stories and experiences, all it's a mescolanza of emotion and information that comes out in the work.
Absolutely. This is such one of the other things I love about the project is that it's so timely. As you said earlier about the, you know, just all of the emphasis and sort of the bad emphasis on immigrants within a recent political climate has been extremely just terrible, really negative, and feeling like, you know, and what is an American person really? You know, when you look at the number of immigrants who've come to this country over, you know, decades and centuries, you know, it really is a great thing to have now, a sort of a reclaiming of one's heritage, you know, wherever you come from, and your project does that, and it does it so beautifully. And which is why I was so enthusiastic to talk to you and learn more about what motivated you and how you felt about putting it together, and also what you'd like to see happen with it as you grow it, you know.
Oh, that's a great question. what I find happening now, we are up to 54 artists, and I'm consciously now growing the project slowly,
Mhm.
because although I know there are many talented Italian Americans who are artists. And by the way, I don't say Italian American artists because that suggests something, and I'm sure artists of color deal with this too, queer artists, Black artists.
Mm.
For the most part, we're not making queer art or Black art or Italian American art. We're making art that comes from our experience, but it is certainly filtered through our art school training and through our involvement in the contemporary art world. So we're contemporary artists with a particular ethnicity, which helps to shape and inform the work. So while there are many talented Italian Americans out there who are artists, this project can embrace just so many, because it's a lot of work to do for me. And also I am cognizant of the idea of wanting to show the work, getting these artists shown, for us to be able to show as a group. And while I think there may occasionally be times when smaller numbers within the group will show, depending on the circumstances, I'd really, I mean, under the rubric of Italianità, I would like to see all of us show together. In part because it will give us all an opportunity to meet up.
Exactly.
I mean, most of us don't know everyone else.
Right.
So that's something I'd like to see. And if we are, if we are hundreds of artists in this group, that will never happen. It would just be too large. Also geographically, we are all from New York City and its environs, or the Northeast. And so logistically, if we are going to show or get together, it is much more difficult to do that if we are beyond a certain geographic area. So I've kind of focused on our Northeast area. However, as to how it might grow, one thing that interests me, and I've just started to write about it a little bit, is the breadth of the Italian diaspora. I write in the introduction that more Italians emigrated from Italy to South America than North America, and to Argentina specifically. Yes. And within North America, there is also a large Italian American population in Canada, which brings an interesting overlay for the Montrealers, because they're not only bilingual, they're trilingual. They're grappling with two languages beyond Italian. And I'm interested in those artists who came over here as Italians and became Americans. So we can call that first generation, or we can call them immigrants, whatever the terminology. That's a different experience than you or I had. So I'm interested in that. And then, as there are several artists I'm working with now who have not yet sent me all their material, who are from Argentina. And I'm interested in their experience, which is another trilingual, tricultural experience.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm interested in broadening that to include some of the diaspora.
That's great. That's interesting. My grandmother on my mother's side, her grandfather unfortunately left the family when my grandmother was very young, and he left them on Ponza, which is another island in the area of the sort of Neapolitan scope of the sea, and he went to Argentina and started a whole new family there.
Oh.
So, there is that sort of, there's a branch, a sort of very distant branch of the family that we never knew and will never know probably out there. So it's interesting how it becomes much more complex depending on the country that the Italian person is emigrating to.
Yes, that's right. Well, there's also another fairly large immigrant population in Australia,
Oh, really?
which I'm just learning about. And there's an artist who left Italy and moved to Australia. So I'm interested in speaking with him.
Mhm.
It means I have to change the language because I'm writing about it, because it's no longer Italian American, it's Italian
Whatever.
something, Canadian, Argentinian, Australian. Um, and, my own family, there are Matteras, Black Matteras in South Africa.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if they are family members, but Mattera or Mattera is it's pronounced in Napoli, on the island of Ischia specifically, is not that common a name except on the island of Ischia. So my sense is that whoever left there for parts elsewhere in the world probably carries some genetic material that is similar to mine.
Mhm.
But I have no real idea. Sooner or later, I'll do that 23andMe thing and find out just exactly, how that tree branches out.
Yeah, that would be interesting. That would be very interesting. In this, especially in this sort of recent political climate, I think that while an emphasis on a particular ethnic group might appear to be very exclusive to that group, what you're doing is because, and I think it's because of the art. I think that art,
Yeah.
is a universal language that for all people, regardless of where they come from, that supports inclusivity rather than exclusion. And so it's just an interesting idea to have the emphasis on, this particular group of artists now that we're dealing now, the current group being Italian/American.
Mm-hmm.
But that it really does engender an expansive view of what it means to be an immigrant, that it really isn't so much about being within a particular category or cubbyhole, but that it's an expansive thing depending on where you are and how you're raised, and then what you do with your life, and how what you give expands into other communities and affects other people's lives. And I think that's really a great thing. And I really commend you for doing this. I think it's just it's timely and it's important. And I think it will carry a lot of weight in the future.
Well, thank you for saying that. I don't know how to, I'm going to say this, even though I may have the wrong words for this, but let me try. I always grew up with a sense of other. If you grow up in an Italian community, you grow up with a sense of other. You are olive-skinned people with brown hair and brown eyes for the most part. And the blonde-haired, blue-eyed people are, like they're other. We're other from them. Mm-hmm. So after 18 years of living in my hometown, Revere, Massachusetts, just north of Boston, or north of Boston, as they say up there. After 18 years of feeling other, suddenly, as an Italian American, I got lumped in with all those other white people. It was shocking because I had always seen them as other. Right. So it's interesting how one's perspective changes depending on where you are, exactly. and who you're talking with.
Exactly.
So, but so much of the immigrant experience is us and them, here and now and then, here and there. It's not this line of who we are and how we get somewhere. There's just such a jumble depending on who you're talking to, depending on the gender, the generation, the culture. It's really fascinating, and ultimately it's a we. All of us, we're humans, and we share all of the basic stuff that other humans share. But we do have very specific, all of us in our various ethnicities, all have very specific things that we share. Sometimes they cross connect,
Mhm.
and other times they're, really specific to a particular ethnic group. And then within the ethnic group, they're specific to the gender,
Exactly.
which now these days is also more diffuse.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting. Life is interesting.
I agree, and I think when it comes down to the art that's made as a result of all of these experiences, I think that that's where you know that's where in that sort of sphere of universal language that becomes the sort of potentially unifying factor, and that's a really
Yes.
good thing.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because one of the things that I did with the project is I organized it's organized by art, even though the stories have some very interesting threads and connections. I organized the project by the art. So part one is the the art that is that comes from the immigrant experience.
Mhm.
And part two is the art that goes beyond the sphere of ethnicity. The artist may be informed by their culture, but we are looking at geometric abstraction, we're looking at figuration, uh, we're looking at the interests of organic expression or expressive abstraction or gestural abstraction. So I'm trying to organize it into ways that make sense for not only for the readers outside of Italianita, but for the artists within it. We are, we're making art that is contemporary art. Even those of us who are drawing from our culture, we are filtering it through our experience as art trained artists who work in a contemporary art world.
Exactly. And it is very well organized. When you look at
Thanks.
the scope of the website, it's really great in terms of how you broke down the different sections.
That was the hardest part of
I
doing
bet.
it,
I bet.
how to organize it.
Yeah, yeah, I totally can understand that. So yeah, so I think that for the sake of a little more, just some brevity, because I want to just cover all the important points in the talk, which I think we have. Is there anything else you want to say that you feel is important to document before we wrap up our discussion?
No, I think you really had great questions, and you really gave me the leeway to talk about the project. I would say for anyone who's interested, the website is italianita-art.com. That's ITALIANITA. Italianita. Maybe we can hold it up somewhere. We can write it and hold it up.
Well, you know what I'm going to do, since because I'm going to save this as we discussed. I'm
Okay.
going to save this video. So what I will do is I will title
Oh, perfect.
that,
Perfect. Yeah, yeah.
right, with your name and with the name of the entire information will be in the title of the video. So that way it's going to be easy to find.
Oh, great. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we'll have it as I mean, for me, as I said, like you can use the video however you want to use it. But
Thank you.
For me, it's just important. I felt it was important to document this conversation in person, like we're talking to each other, because I think it's relevant, and I think it can continue to be relevant down the road, however it sort of unfolds, in the future. These kinds of conversations that have been happening during the pandemic, where people are like having, in a way, more opportunity to talk to each other. They've never met, but they're in different parts of the country or different parts of the world. It's really been kind of a great thing to have that chance.
Well, and that's, that's what the stories did. I hope that's what the stories do in a different medium. I mean, you have to read them as opposed to
Sure.
watch and listen. But it is the stories that are so important. And hopefully we'll all get together at some point at an opening, and we'll have a microphone, and each artist will have a chance to say something about themselves, of their work. And so this, you're at the very beginning of a project that hopefully will grow as other artists get involved and make videos and tell more of their stories.
Yeah, I mean, I thought about, maybe talking to some of the other artists in the group,
Oh, wouldn't that be great?
and then having you use that as a support,
Yes.
for what you're planning to do with the projects. I like learning about other artists and their lives and their work, and I'm always very curious about what they're doing. And so for me, it's just very interesting to have these conversations, and also inspiring. It's like, it's still kind of hard to go through this time, meaning like are we in a real post-pandemic? I mean, who knows, but
Not yet.
things have changed, and it's still difficult, I think, psychically to come to terms with how our lives have changed. So when I have an opportunity to, talk to someone who's, still working very creatively and inspiring other people, for me, it's like, oh wow, I want to be in that, like I'll feel better about everything,
Well, thank you. This was a lovely conversation and a great opportunity to talk about Italianità. I really appreciate it, Anna.
Yeah, I'm going to I'll be in touch with you,
Okay.
and I'll post this up soon in its raw state, we're just gonna, and then we'll see how we can maybe do some other conversations.
La prossima volta in italiano.
In Italiano. Good luck. Okay, I'll try.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, I'll see you soon.
Thank you. Okay, ciao, ciao.